Hey guys, so I want to quickly just review some vocabulary words and to make sure that we're all on the same page about what these terms mean. So when we go forward looking at political parties, looking at your own kind of political ideas, that we're working off the same set of vocab terms and understanding. So um, let's quickly, like, gonna flip through this. We've looked at this, and this is actually pretty significant to what we're talking about. The preamble of the Constitution, the stated purpose of our government. And you might realize, as we've been looking at this, that you agree with some of these, and then some of these you think maybe should be replaced by other issues, etc. So we've talked about that. We've talked about the kind of constant struggle between equality and freedom, and so we're gonna these just kind of introduce the idea of how your personal feelings about the role of the government, what role you think the government should play in your life and society's life. Should it be very involved or should it be more hands off? Do you think that our problems are need to be fixed by a governing body, or do you think that our problems would be better resolved by ourselves and that the government should be hands off? So these are political ideologies. Again, I would say there are no wrong answers, but that's not entirely true either. So let's talk about that. All right. So let's start with the idea of, before we get into liberalism, what is a political ideology? A political ideology is the idea, the ideal government. Ideology is like how you ideally see things. So a political ideology would be, in your ideal world, what role do you think the government should play? Okay. Now, we're going to look at this idea of the political spectrum here in a second. But that's what, focus on the idea of ideology. You might have different types of ideologies as well, but this is mostly to do with the government. So the two major ideologies are conservative and liberal. If you look there, someone spelled conservative wrong. Don't know who that is. I can't change it now because and so you might hear to the right or to the left. That is, those two, those are synonymous. When you talk about someone who is conservative or someone that is a right-wing person, that would be to the right. Okay, because we're looking at this idea of a spectrum, and we're going to see is what you're going to realize is there are infinite places on the spectrum that somebody could find, and to be even more complicated, there's another spectrum, another axis that you're going to put on top of it. So not every, I mean, the truth resists simplicity. I heard somebody say once, and I like that idea. It's really difficult to say somebody is merely a conservative or merely a liberal. There are so many more layers to what this means. So to begin with, liberal or to the left, they believe in the idea of freedom and equality, freedom. However, to get back to this kind of conflict between freedom and equality, they believe somebody who is liberal believes that equality is more important than individual freedom. Somebody that is liberal, typically politically and socially liberal, thinks that people should forfeit individual rights for the good of the whole. That freedom and liberty is not more important than individual, than communal kind of social well-being, right? So for instance, especially when you're going to talk about minority groups, if you're going to look at groups that are particularly underrepresented or beyond underrepresented, have been given, born into different circumstances in the United States for a variety of reasons, that a liberal perspective on that would be that the government should intervene to kind of level the playing field. And sometimes that might mean taking things away or limiting the freedoms of other groups of people in order to lift up the groups that are underrepresented. Okay, so that is a liberal ideology. Conservative means, from the root word conserve, to keep things the way they are. Now, that is very different according to what country you're in or what stage you are in like historically, to what it is you're trying to conserve. A conservative now is much different than a conservative was even 15 years ago, and is vastly different than a conservative was 150 years ago or 200 years ago, right? So if you let's look at this idea. This is a moderate. Really, most people are kind of right in here. Most people might lean liberal, lean conservative. Very few people are down here in the fringes, and this is an important one. We're going to talk about political parties and et cetera. We'll talk about that a little bit next week. But as I was saying, yeah, okay. So if we're going to look at an idea of something like women's right to vote, okay, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that would be a very liberal idea. That would be almost to the outskirts of liberal. Today, that is not even considered like controversial, right? A women's right to vote. If somebody is against a women's right to vote, now that would be extremely conservative, right? So you see these two things completely change with time and change with kind of progression that has been made over time through social movements, through government policy changes, et cetera. And we'll talk about how society pressures government into making changes as well. So conservative, to conserve traditions the way they are, liberal, to promote constant change, to promote equality at the expense sometimes of individual freedoms. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at extreme examples of both cases. An extreme example of conservatism would be nationalism. The idea that people believe that we need to conserve our identity so much that anybody who represents something that is other than our national identity is a harm to our national identity and won't allow us to conserve it. So nationalists, and this is not just in the United States, it is around the world, and actually nationalist movements certainly are growing and increasing in popularity around the world, as in the United States, might have strong immigration rules because of the fear that surrounds the cultural impact of immigration on the United States, or the economic impact of immigration on the United States. It's definitely a conservative ideology. A more liberal ideology about something like immigration would be that they enrich cultural norms in the United States rather than take away from conserving them. Okay, so then nationalism on steroids, right? A step further is the idea of fascism, right? That so much that the government needs to intervene and punish people who are actively taking away from what they see as a particular culture, set of traditions, or norms. So again, you wouldn't say somebody's conservative is a fascist. That is a giant unfounded leap. Likewise, you wouldn't say someone who's liberal is a communist, which we're going to get to in a second. That these are all on a spectrum from one end to the next. It's from one extreme to the next. And what you're going to realize is on the next platform, the next thing that we're going to look at is once you get to the fringes, life looks pretty similar. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Socialism, liberal to the left. Socialism is not a moderately liberal idea. It is a unapologetically liberal idea that the government sole job is to make a level playing field for everybody, that the government needs to provide social services, free, not just education, healthcare, housing, everything needs to be given to citizens to make sure that everyone has a level playing field. A more conservative ideology would probably say that that is up to citizens to provide for themselves. Not that they're necessarily against those things, not that conservatives are against equality, but conservatives might say, or a more conservative idea might say that that is not the government's responsibility, ultimately because they might do it inefficiently, okay? And then an extreme version of socialism is the idea of communism, that the government needs to go a step further. And this is where you bring in the role of the economy, okay? And what they're gonna say is, in order to make complete equality in a communist society, that the biggest factor in determining inequality in our country is not race, it is not religion, it is not ethnicity, it is not gender, it is economy. It is economic, social economic positions. And a communist would say that the government needs to have complete control over the economy in order to promote social equality. That is the idea of communism. Now, also, a fascist would say the same thing. The government needs to have complete control over the economy down here in order to promote a certain ideological, a certain cultural norm. Okay, so for instance, a fascist might say, we are not going to allow any immigrants to take jobs away from American-born citizens. A communist would say the government is going to give all jobs to American-born citizens. And so in practicality, those things are pretty similar. So this is where things get a little confusing. A market economy means the government has no control over the economy. Citizens do. So this is like complete economic freedom. And then the government has complete control over the economy. It's complete government control over the economy. So if we're going to look at, we looked at this here, how these things kind of land on this spectrum. Nationalists might believe in, okay, that idea is actually kind of neutral as far as government control of the economy is concerned. Fascist, communist, both to the extent you're much less democratic, a less free country, complete control of the economy by the government. Socialism definitely has economic control. What you have up here, and this is a term that we haven't really talked about, this is a socially conservative idea and market economy idea. And this is complete freedom. Borderline anarchy is the idea of libertarianism. Okay, so a libertarian sounds liberal, but actually is probably, this is a strange one. A libertarian might actually be over here, sorry, is a more liberal idea politically, because they aren't really, a libertarian is not concerned with things like same-sex marriage, legalization of drugs, social issues. They're like, hey, people should do whatever they want. But the one thing is they think is the government should not be involved in anybody's decision-making. So a libertarian might say, I should be able to wear a mask or not wear a mask. It's up to me. A libertarian should be able to, would say, I should be able to, do drugs or not. That's up to me. And that is the idea of a libertarian. So no government control of the economy and no government control over social issues. A conservative, so again, you're going to see how you might fall somewhere on this chart, like compared to how do you think the government should control your political choices, and how do you think the government can control your money? Okay, so a socialist, those two things are very closely tied together, because in order to promote social services, free healthcare for all its citizens, you're going to need to control the economy. You're going to need to tax people in order to pay for things like that. Okay, so you're going to see how things like that are overlapped. All right, so what you're going to do next is you're going to start to look at these different ideas and figure out where they fit on this scale. Are they conservative? Are they politically liberal? Are they economically, like market, private citizen control, or government control? And then we're going to start to figure out where you fit, and then we're going to start to figure out where American political parties fit on this spectrum, and how they work. Okay. Alrighty. So I hope that clears it up. If it doesn't, please come to class with some questions about specific issues that you want answered, because I'm sure if you have a question, somebody else does too. Okay. Stay safe out there. I'll see you soon. Bye.